problems in an environment that contains 25,000 plus managed Windows devices. Okay. So everybody knows today the bad guys go after the end user, and securing the end user desktops in an environment my size is a big task. It requires a lot of resources to go out and do the patching, to do the vulnerability remediation, do those types of things. We've been looking for different ways to try to cut down on that, to reduce the amount of work we have to put into that. What I'm going to talk about today is one of the ways that one approach that we're going about to do that. So before I get started doing that, there's just a couple of things. I mean, the internet's everywhere. Everybody's connected to it. It's getting bigger, and most everybody connects to some sort of commercial piece of hardware, commercial piece of software. But the public, doesn't know anything about vulnerabilities, don't care. InfoSec awareness, even in the industry, is not as high as it should be at this point. If you're outside defense, healthcare, or financial. Unfortunately, IT has developed, unlike 30 years ago when I first started in this business, IT is driven by the consumer now. When I first started, IT was driven by large businesses, it was driven by the government, now it's driven by consumers. So basically we end up with products with, there's no penetration resistance to the product, there's no security engineering that goes into the product, and there's very little incentive on the part of the people building the stuff to make it secure. So we end up with a bunch of insecure products. You combine that with your undisciplined user, and basically we have products that are full of flaws. Flaws go back to own systems, and all the things that we've been doing for the last 10 years don't do much with respect to trying to protect us in terms of protect our systems. In November of last year, a guy named Ron Ross from the NIST proposed a new theory or a new security stratagem. He called it Agile Defense. It's not really that new. It consists of all the things that we've already done, we've been doing in terms of compartmentalizing or segregating your assets. In other words, taking your servers, putting them behind the firewall in the data center, control what protocols go in and out to those servers. Target allocation of security controls. Don't put firewalls where you don't need them. That sort of thing. Limiting privilege. That's a big one for us in terms of we've had an environment where pretty much every laptop user had admin privileges. We've now squeezed that off. They're not doing that anymore. Routine reconstruction to a known secure state is one thing that is fairly new with us. It's not something we thought about up until the desktop virtualization idea came along. So that's just one of the tools we have in our kit in terms of trying to protect from that sort of stuff. There's nothing new here in terms of what the favorite attack vectors are. Internally, we've tracked attacks going back as long as 4 years. Okay, we can go back and track phishing emails and bad websites and stuff back to the same set of players going as far back as 4 years. And we probably could go back further than that if we had the data. We just don't have the data. But again, this is what they do. So you've all seen this. It's basically bad guy sends an email, user clicks on email, machine gets whacked. Bad guy comes in, spreads around, and then data starts going out of the environment. Okay, so that's relatively benign. We've seen that a lot. There's a new one that we have been seeing here lately. We call it man in the mailbox. Basically, it takes advantage of a trusted relationship between an existing supplier we have and our buyers. So that relationship exists. So buyer needs something, he sends a note to the supplier, says, hey, I need a new component, I need a new widget. Supplier sends back a quote or whatever. Bad guy gets into supplier system because the suppliers aren't as diligent about what they're doing from a security perspective as we are. Okay, they don't have the staff, they don't have the budget that we have in order to try to protect our systems. The bad guys know this, so they attack the suppliers. They compromise the supplier system. Once he's in the supplier system, he basically becomes the supplier from a masquerading perspective, fishes around inside the supplier's mailbox and finds out, well, we've requested something from this particular supplier. He takes that thing that the supplier has sent us and adds a couple of extra things to it and sends it back. Now the buyer, who works with the supplier on and off all the time, doesn't suspect anything because it's just, oh, it's just an updated quote. It's an updated revised spec, whatever it happens to be. And the next thing you know, we got the bad guy in our system. Okay. Targeting websites, again, nothing new here. We call them water holes because it's where people gather. Same attack vector, it's a different attack vector, but the end result is essentially the same, right? We get machines that are impacted and bad guys in the system. We did actually have a USB-based attack run against us at one point in time, about 3 years ago. You're all familiar with USB-based attacks. Essentially, it works if you had auto run running, which at the time we did have auto run running. So, we get bad USB drive. Literally, they seeded the parking lot. Okay, we had 10 drives that actually made it into the facility. 6 of them actually got plugged into machines. Yeah. Okay. So the USB drive comes in, gets into the machine. It's viral in nature, so a good USB drive goes in the machine. It gets now bad, and it just jumps from machine to machine to machine across air gaps into somebody's laptop that goes into their home system. They plug in a new USB drive. It's now bad, but the end result is data goes out the door. Okay. Lately, we've seen a new one. It's similar to the man in the mailbox type thing, in the sense that the bad guy will somehow, in some way, shape, or form, either through man in the mailbox or some other mechanism, will actually get in and own one of our machines. When he does that, he installs a piece of software that we refer to as a controller. All right. Once the controller is installed, an individual will come along and plug in another USB drive. Well, that USB drive gets a collector installed on it. So now we have a USB drive floating around our environment that has collector software installed on it. That USB drive will make the rounds through the facility, being plugged into machines. And every time it's plugged into a machine, again, if the auto run feature is working on the machine, it installs a little piece of software on there that starts plowing through the machine, looking for specific things. Okay, there's an INI file that goes with the software that tells the software specifically what to look for. In our case, if it's one of our airplane programs or something of that nature, it starts looking for that software. As it finds the software, it collects it up, it zips it up, and then encrypts it. Sooner or later, that controller or that collector USB stick will come back around to that machine. When it does, the collector then just dumps everything that's gathered up back onto the USB drive. Okay? The USB drive eventually will get back to the machine that installed the original controller. When it gets back to the original controller machine, it dumps everything back onto the controller machine, and the controller machine ships it off to the bad guys. Okay? So these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with in our environment today. All right? So that's a little bit of history. Motivation, why do we decide we're going to mess around with a virtual desktop infrastructure? My boss asked me about it, and I said, well, look, let's look at virtualization. Let's go back to this whole concept of centralized processing, which is where we started out 30 years ago. We'd had a significant amount of success with presentation virtualization using Citrix Presentation Server to virtualize our factory floor, in the sense that we were able to go in and eliminate all the blueprint booths in a mile-long factory floor and go to a delivering work instructions and delivering blueprints virtually through a Citrix Presentation Server. So we figured, okay, if we do that there, shouldn't be that difficult to go off and do this whole server-based virtualization stuff. Obviously, the biggest deal is to enhance security, and this is where we feel like there's the biggest benefit. If you go into a fat client environment, every disk, each machine has its own disk with its own set of operating systems and its own set of applications. That's a machine that needs to be updated and patched. In an environment where you have 25,000 plus devices, that takes a long time to get a set of patches out and rolled into the machines. So there's, between Microsoft Patch Tuesday and the time we get all the machines patched, there's a lag time there where we have systems exposed. We have a common set of applications that goes on every machine, but there are situations where some of the users need a different set of applications. There are a one-off set of applications. Some of those applications, believe it or not, you have to have admin privileges in order to be able to run the application, or they have to have admin privileges to be able to install the application. Again, you have a user with admin privileges, the threat level on your system goes up exponentially. We also have other pieces of software, system-level software running on the machines in order to do things like full disk encryption and to be able to back up the desktops to prevent loss of information. Well, sure.
Actually, are you going to A, define which kind of virtualization you're talking about at some point?
Yeah.
And B, define your scope within your environment? It sounds like you're aiming towards only desktops. Is that correct?
In this particular, for what we're doing here is just desktops. Our server infrastructure has been virtualized for a couple years now.
But you're not looking at mobile at all?
We'll get to that. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit to mobile in just a minute. Mobile turns out to be one of the issues that you have with virtual desktop infrastructure. Okay, how do you deal with the mobile guy, right? Okay, well, and I'll get to that in just in a bit. And what was your first question? I'm sorry.
Defining what kind of virtualization.
Okay, yeah. Our presentation virtualization was basically Citrix presentation server. Okay, what we're talking about here is server-based virtualization. It's server-based desktop virtualization. Yeah, like I said, we'll get to that. So in our virtual desktop infrastructure in that environment, we basically have a single image that we maintain. So by maintaining a single image that gets streamed into the desktop, then we've eliminated the number of machines we have to remediate in terms of patching and so on and so forth. It also allows us to eliminate some of the one-off configurations that we've been dealing with. What leaves us with one image to patch. The OS patches go into a single instance, and then that instance actually gets streamed out to each of the virtual machines every time they reboot. We force the machines to reboot once a day. So, at the application level, in terms of dealing with applications, we've moved into application virtualization so that to stream the additional applications out to that people need out to their desktops. In other words, so the core application, the core virtual image will have Microsoft products on it, basically Microsoft Office products on it, and some system-level software like virus management, those types of things. Everything else gets streamed out to the box as a virtual application. We do this using a tool called ThinApp. One thing about stuff you virtualize within ThinApp is it runs in user mode. Okay, it doesn't require enhanced privileges to run anything inside of a ThinApp virtualized application. Because we virtualize the application and stream just the application out to the user when they require its use, we can patch just that one application, and the next time the user goes to use the application, he's got the patched application. So in the morning, he could have a vulnerable version of Adobe. We get the patch, we patch it, he fires up Adobe again in the afternoon, and he's got a patched version. Reduce costs. Whether or not you reduce the cost here or not depends on how many of these things you deploy. If you're a small shop, if you got, you're not going to see a huge amount of reduced costs. In fact, this will probably cost you more money to operate this way. In our environment, to refresh a fat client takes about 8 hours because of all the data, configuration settings, and whatnot that the users keep on their desktop. So we have to transfer all that data up to a server and then transfer it back down onto the new machine. With the thin client, refresh takes about 3 minutes. You come in with a new client, you unplug the old one, you plug the new one in. They can be in the middle of a session, doesn't make any difference. You can unplug the box, hook up the new box, they go right back into the existing session.
Generally, when you refresh a system, you're doing so because there's something that you need to get rid of on the old system. What you just described doesn't actually get rid of any of their state, so is it really an apples-to-apples comparison?
Well, in our instance, when we refresh a system, when you refresh a VDS box, it's primarily because it's broke.